It's a real pleasure to welcome James Laughlin to the Caring CEO. Welcome, James.
Oh, such a pleasure to be here, Graham. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. What does care in the workplace mean to you?
It's interesting when you asked me that question, I started to go back through all the workplaces that I've been a part of as a staff member. And care to me, kindness comes to mind, people treating each other well, but also curiosity. I remember I went to Vancouver, Canada as a young fellow and was with a team, and the leader of that team came up to me. I was 2 weeks into being with the team, and he says, James, what do you think of the strategy? What? I'm like, I'm 18, 19 years old. You're asking me what I felt seen. I felt like I mattered. I felt like he cared about me. So I think the curiosity piece is really what it's all about, being curious, being kind.
I really love that. And I know that, psychological safety is seen as the biggest predictor of innovative and successful teams. And an important part of that is everyone feels heard. Even, introverts ask questions and they often come out with really great answers because they've thought well about it. So that's a great thing. And feeling heard, it does show that someone cares. If I ask you that question, I interviewed an amazing leader called Bob Chapman, who wrote a book called Everybody Matters. Unfortunately, just passed away about a month ago. But he built a business from 20 million to 3.6 billion. And he said the real insight for him was that, he first of all thought that caring was going and talking with people. But he later realized you show you care by listening with empathy. And, it just demonstrates what you talked about. Even as a 19-year-old, you felt involved and engaged and all that sort of thing.
100%. And I think that listening is the key. I had 6 years ago, I had a group, a leadership group I was running, and it was leaders from all different industries, CEOs, and there was one athlete in the group. And this one athlete happened to be the captain of the All Blacks rugby team at the time. And I noticed that every time we met, 2 or 3 hours at a time, he was the last one to speak. Often for the first 90 minutes, he said nothing. And he'd be taking notes and nodding and looking. And then when he came to speak, he spoke to, well, look, James, I heard what you said here at the start of the conversation. This is what I'm thinking. Can you tell me more about this? Hey, John, I heard what you said over here. He showed us all that he'd been listening deeply. And arguably, he's the most successful person at the table. Yet he was the most curious and he listened rather than spoke.
Yeah, yeah. Counts for a lot, doesn't it? It really
Yeah.
does. And I think it also demonstrates that the leader doesn't pretend to know everything because there's no leader that knows everything now. But hearing those insights does really ensure that hopefully the right information is on the table to make the best decision. So, it's
Absolutely.
very, very, very engaging. James, you had a bit of an interesting background in Northern Ireland. Would you mind telling our listeners a bit about that?
Yeah, Graham, for those that are not familiar with Northern Ireland, it's a beautiful country. And I mean, if you ever go there, you'll feel very well looked after. They're very hospitable. But for many decades, Northern Ireland's been torn apart by religion and religious divide, Catholics and Protestants. And I grew up understanding that and witnessing that and, sometimes being pretty close to some of that. And so from a young age, I wanted to travel and see the world. And I was very fortunate to have a hobby, and I came across this hobby from my headmaster's office, being in there for all the wrong reasons. So I was in there as a young 9-year-old getting punished for bad behavior. And he's what I call a possibilitarian, someone who, instead of looking at problems, as in me being the problem child, all he looked at was possibilities. So instead of detention, he gave me a set of drumsticks. And that's all he did, and planted a seed, and he encouraged me. And very fortunately, it became a passion and this hobby. And I really wanted to be the world's best drummer. And so that's what initially got me traveling from Northern Ireland, was to compete at the World Championships. At 13 years of age was the time I first went.
Wow, wow. And what did, building that skill in drumming do to your self-esteem?
I was a kid that didn't really have a lot of other talent or wasn't being praised for being a great footballer. Northern Ireland football is the biggest thing. I was not good. I had two left feet, Graham. So there was never going to be a George Best for me, that's for sure. So when I got praise, it made me feel good and it made me double down on practicing more, getting better. And so for me, I really understood from a young age, it's not about talent. Life is not about talent because I didn't have a lot of drumming talent. It was about skills and hard work. And so from a young age, I was doing 2 to 4 hours a day. On the weekends, it would have been 6 to 8 hours a day, but getting results. And I thought there's a connection between hard work and commitment and results. So it really taught me a lot about that. And certainly my self-esteem built from that.
It was, as I understand it, it was almost like two parts to your career. The first part was, building an elite drumming skill and the habit and all that sort of thing. And then, as I understand it, you then evolved into coaching. Would you mind just letting our listeners know about that evolution and I guess some of the important steps you took and what were some of the challenges, to make that transition?
Yeah, Graham, like many listeners, I'm sure we come to a point in our lives where there's a transition and we maybe get bored or we get burnt out or we have a major failure and it's like, well, something has to change. I need to go in a different direction. And so for me, as a drummer, I won my first world title at 13. I then went on to win another 6. And I came down to New Zealand to help a team here. And they became the first ever from New Zealand to go and win the world championships. I'd sold drums, played drums, competed as a drummer. I got to the point in my mid to late 20s where I started to get a little bored and a little burnt out. I wasn't in a good place. And I was drinking heavily, drinking to celebrate successes, drinking to, when I didn't have success, to de-stress, to get to sleep. And it really wasn't a healthy relationship. So I seen this advert come up, and you'll laugh when I say it, but it was in Sydney, Australia, it was called UPW, Tony Robbins, Unleash the Power Within. And I thought, I need to go to that. I don't know who this guy is, but he seems very interesting. And this seems like what I need to do. So I went over there for 4 or 5 days, didn't sleep hardly at all, 4 days of 18-hour days. And some of it was great, some of it wasn't. But what was amazing, I had an epiphany on day 2 where I went, I've been James the drummer for all these years. But what I'm seeing and hearing is I actually have a different skill set here that I can actually help others become high performers in their careers, their chosen industries. So I came back to New Zealand. I'd never been to university. I just came straight to, New Zealand as a kid. So I came back over here from Sydney at 30, decided I'll go back to uni. I wanted to get a degree. So I got a bachelor's degree in management and leadership. I then went to the ICF, the International Coaching Federation, and got accredited as a coach and started working with all sorts of people in leadership and business. Started to see results. And then a local rugby team called Canterbury Rugby. This is where it all kind of took off. Canterbury Rugby, seeing the results I was getting with people in sport and in business, they brought me in. And a lot of these players play with the All Blacks, so they play for the big super teams. And so that really started to build momentum, and large corporates started to catch on and go, James, well, could you do that with us? So Graham, in a lot of ways, it was organic, but I led with curiosity. I didn't want to sit in the boredom or suffer in that pain of drinking my life away. And I thought something needs to change. And it was uncomfortable and scary, but I'm so glad I did it.
Fantastic. And you've got a great book called Habits of High Performers. And, I know you've worked with lots of people from sport, from politics, business, that sort of thing. What prompted you to decide to do this book?
Yeah, every year I run a leadership event. It's called High Performance Leadership. And every year it would sell out. The second year in, somebody came up and said, James, that's a book. I said, what's a book? Oh, the last couple of days we spent together, you should put it in a book. I said, I'm not a writer. I just enjoy meeting people and speaking. The next year comes around and another person comes up and goes, you've got a book. I said, oh, someone said that last year. And she, yeah, but I actually work for a publisher. I was like, oh, okay, let's chat. So fast forward 3 or 4 months, they convinced me that, James, you can't get everybody in the world in a room. Not everybody can get the time off or afford it. How about you put a book out with all of your understandings, your IP, your frameworks around self-leadership? And so both Penguin and HarperCollins pitched me and proposed. And then in the end, I went with HarperCollins. And for me, it was a really amazing process, but very challenging to distill all of my thoughts down into a book and make sure that it's a tactical and pragmatic book. That was challenging, but I'm super proud to have it out there. It's available globally. And you just, I don't know, I'm sure you're the same. You're an incredible author. Getting a quiet note that nobody else will ever read to say, I read your book and it
Mm.
changed my life. I had a guy 3 weeks ago sent my team a message going, this really changed my life. My wife and my kids are so much happier. And I said to my team, can I connect with him? And so they wrote back and says, James would like to have a call with you. And you go, what, James is going to call me. I would love that. So we jump on Zoom, and within about 10 seconds, he's in tears. I says, is everything okay? He says, James, I just can't believe it. Like, I've read your book twice. It's literally in the last 6 months, it's changed my life. And like, I felt super emotional just witnessing that. And it was a quiet, private conversation. He told me all about his life before and after. And I thought, I'm glad I put the time in to write that book. And if it changes one person's life and that's it, awesome. Job well done.
Yeah, and there is certainly something about that where it goes beyond what you know about. When you do your workshops and that type of thing, you see everyone in the room, but when it goes beyond that, it is really, really special. And, I've also been incredibly fortunate to get that sort of feedback from people as well, particularly, as you know, I went through some really, really dark times. I was out of work for 5 years. And those, I think if you share your story, it gives people permission to share their story. And as you know, people aren't always forthcoming telling about the tough parts of their life. People often cover it up, particularly men. Men are very, very poor at sharing vulnerability, but it's such a powerful thing for building connection with people.
Superpower.
It's a really lovely thing. I, as you know, read a book called Great Leaders Care, and it's broken into sort of 3 parts. The first part is the mindset of self-care, building our personal resilience. Crew care, which is about building psychologically safe and resilient teams. And red zone care, which is about how to identify and support someone that's struggling. So in the topic of self-care, how do you keep fuel in your own tank?
I wasn't always very good at it, Graham. I'll be honest with you. It's interesting. I talk about high performance. The book's called Habit of High Performers. When I look back on my life, I was probably a high performer in an area of my life, and that was my career. So my definition now of high performance is consistently exceeding norms whilst maintaining healthy relationships and well-being. I sucked at the last bit, Graham. I really did. So people would look at me and go, hey, James, you're 7-time world champion, 10-time national champion. You're such a high performer. Yeah, you might have been right in my career. But if they could look underneath it all and come behind the scenes and see that, well, your marriage is failing and ending in divorce ultimately. You're drinking way too much booze. You're eating crap food. You are stressing out. You're juggling a million balls with your career. It's the ultimate of non-high performance. Wasn't sustainable. So I've learned a lot from what not to do. And I've spent the last decade studying the highest performers on the planet, whether they're running countries, Formula One teams, small businesses, if they're busy parents. I've been talking to them all. What do you do? And so there's a few protocols I've got. One is called Take Your Meds. Do you mind if I share that with your audience?
Of course, that'd be fantastic. I was going to ask you about that. So
awesome. Really, really simple. So think of the acronym MEDS. And I want the listener to do this right now. It'll take, even if they're moving or they're running or they're driving, they can do this in their head. So MEDS. In the last month, we're going to rate ourselves 1 to 5. 1 being terrible, 5 being awesome. So mental training, or if you want to call it meditation. In the last month, how much of that have you done? What's the quality of that mental training? It might be breath work, might be some form of meditation, 1 to 5. E, exercise. How much have you moved your body in the last month? 1 to 5. D, diet. And Graham, people are going, James, this is such common sense. I'm like, yes, it is, but it's not common practice. What have you been eating? And last but not least, the most critical, most important one, S, sleep. What's your sleep been like over the last month? 1 to 5. And all I ask my clients to do is go, which one's the lowest out of 5? And just focus on that one for the next month and implement a few simple protocols. And I've got lots of protocols in the book that people can do, but there's lots out there. They could search the net for how I get better sleep, but focus on one for a month and try and get it from if you were a 1 out of 5, just get it to a 2. So I'm about incremental improvement. It's not about big action and taking these big swings. Just take small swings often.
And I remember once reading that getting sleep right is the fastest way to improve overall well-being. But if you also consider other elements of well-being, which is, exercise, they're complementary. If you exercise, you're more likely to sleep better. So there's so much overlap. And we found when I was on your podcast that, there's a lot of overlap with what we talked about. I talk about three elements of well-being, which is vitality, and that's our move well, rest well, eat well. I talk about intimacy, building supportive and caring relationships. And then I talk about prosperity, and that's about our contribution to the outside world. That can be in the form of our career, or it could be, where we volunteer for a charity or a school or a sports team. And I also have a self-care scorecard to identify what's your emptiest cup of well-being and what's one little thing. And I think that's the big thing, isn't it? People think if suddenly going to make all these dramatic changes, but all the research around habits from yourself and James Clear and others is that starting small consistently is the best way for it to happen. Can you recall a client that really benefited from that from you? Might have been identifying something they needed to do, and then what was their path in terms of adopting that, and then the end results?
Yeah, great question. I had actually a client from the US. This is maybe about 6 or maybe 7 years ago. And he came to me because he's an insurance broker and wanted to really nail it. Top 10 in the US. He's super driven. So that's initially why he came to work with me. I want to be a high performer in my career. It's like, cool. If we work together, we've got to look at all components of your life. On field, which is your career stuff, and off field, we're going to look at your relationships, your well-being. And so we started looking at his career. We got some quick wins on the boards and, make X amount of calls, get into work early, all the simple things, right? But then we looked at the most important part. What's your life like off field? Well, he was drastically overweight, was very self-conscious about that. It was affecting his energy, affecting his intimacy. It was affecting his work. He didn't have the energy at 2 p.m. He was knackered, and then he's taking Red Bull at 2 p.m. to try and get his energy up again. I'm like, dude, let's just pause. How much are you moving your body? What do you mean moving my body? He's like, I do, 3,000 or 4,000 steps a day. I was like, great. Let's see if we can add an extra 1,000 onto that, and then another 1,000. About a month in, I said, look, I'm your coach, not your friend. And I know these are friendly conversations, but I want to challenge you. I want you to join F45 or CrossFit in your area and give it a go for 3 months. Not 2 goes, 3 months, 4 or 5 times a week. You up for it? So he started it, and he was hooked about 40 days in, feeling great, lost a bit of weight, more energy, community around him, all doing the same thing. I was so proud. About a year and a half ago, he sent me a photo, and it was him with all of his F45 buddies, and he'd just done his 1,000th workout. And I was like,
wow.
And he looks 10 years younger. He looks amazing. And he is an amazing broker. He's getting the money on field. He's got the life off field. It's awesome.
With yourself, what are your habits in the morning? How do you start the day?
Yeah, very simple. So I'm very strict with wake up time. No matter what time I get to bed. So if I'm traveling, like last night, I got in from Fiji. I didn't get home till 9:30. Wasn't sleeping till 10:30. Very late night for me. Usually I'm in bed 8:45 and reading, meditating, sleep. So the morning's always up at that 5:30, 5:45 at the latest. Get up, not to an alarm on my phone. I get up to a silent buzzer just on my watch. So no interaction with the phone. The first thing I do, sit up, grab my journal, which always sits beside me, travels with me, and I write what I'm grateful for. Very simple. And the neuroscience, of course, we know nowadays just backs this up, that when you practice gratitude, there's actually a biochemical release that helps you build this resilience well, allows your organs to thrive. So I start with gratitude. Then I go, what went well yesterday? Well, what actually went down? So tomorrow morning I'll go, I connected with Graham Cowan. We had the most awesome chat. That's what went well yesterday. Then I'll say, what would 1% better look like today? If I had to make today 1% better than yesterday, well, you know what? If I'm honest with you, Graham, so yesterday I did 5,000 steps because I woke up in Fiji, got to the airport, sat on a plane, walked to another plane, sat on a plane, sat in a taxi. Not good. So today, what time is it? It's 12:30 and I'm at 7,000 steps. So I'm almost, past that. Yeah, it's good. So 1% better. There we go. Super simple.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, one thing that I've got two questions I always ask myself at the start of the day, and I meditate to start the day as well. But I ask, what good can I do today? And so it's thinking about, making an impact, having a sense of purpose. And secondly, if I do one thing that will have the greatest impact, what will that be? And, you often have a million things there, but if you just do one and work out when and where you're going to do it, it makes a big difference in terms of it happening. And I think I might have shared on your podcast, Peter Kolwitzer from NYU, he found out that if you decide when and where you're going to do something, it increased the chance of it happening by 300%, threefold.
That's
So,
wild.
yes, it is.
It's so true, though. Yes, the mornings to me are precious. I love mornings. I'll read in the morning. So I'm reading some Stoicism at the minute, really enjoying that. And then move the body. I will always alkalize, so water with lemon. I don't drink coffee anymore because I've figured my body actually doesn't operate well with it, although a lot of people do, and it helps them. And then it's time with family. I love in the morning chatting with Caroline. It's still dark outside, sun's maybe starting to rise. We spend time with my son. It's 30-minute drive to school, so we have great connection on the way to school. Lots of chats, lots of music, working through all his challenges and all his aspirations. So that to me is a successful morning. It's very simple, it's not glamorous, but it sets me up for a great day.
Yeah, wonderful. What about interpersonal relationships? You mentioned your wife and your son, and obviously that's your core team, but what about other friends and that type of thing? Do you have anything in place to build, really caring and supportive relationships there?
Yeah, great question. When I was in my teens and 20s, I was kind of center of all the parties, center of bringing people together. I hosted a St. Patrick's Day party here in New Zealand, had marquees and beer kegs, and I was very social, right? And that was my thing. And I had lots of friends, but very few deep friendships. And interestingly, when I parted with my former wife, after that, I started realizing, oh, some of these friendships were actually conditional. Like, these were conditional on me being with someone specific and us being a unit. And now that we're not together, people took sides. And I was like, this is very interesting. So it made me start thinking about friendship a lot. And there were some tough times and some grieving that I went through for sure. But then I started realizing when I get to 80, well, I look back and go, I'm glad I had 35 friends that were kind of pretty nice and we were quite close. Or would I rather have three amazing mates that we went deep and we talked about our wounds and we talked about our challenges and the things that make us scared? And I thought, no, I want that. I want the three or four. So I've got a really tight circle, super small circle, but we share everything. We're open. And if we don't see each other like this as often as we like, because we're all busy doing our thing, we're texting every day. We're voice noting. There's quick calls. When we do get together, Graham, it's not at the pub for
Yeah.
us. It's in the hills. It's
Yeah.
walking. It's that's joy to me.
It is. And I would have to say that I was never good at that before I had my breakdown. Like, there were lots of friends and contacts, but in terms of being able to share real vulnerability, that was really deficient. And, after I sort of came back from my breakdown, it was building conscious rituals and habits to meet people. Like, there's two guys I meet with every Sunday at Cocoa Beach in Sydney. We meet there, we walk up to Manly, come back, have breakfast. And it's, that ritual is fantastic. It's a lovely environment. It's killing two birds with one stone. You get a chance to walk as well as to, have real connection with people. And of course, there's a lot of, just giving each other a hard time and taking the piss and all this sort of stuff.
Good.
But there's also been discussions about setback and family and kids and finances. And, there's an old saying that a problem shared is a problem halved. And it's so true. And, building that consistency and rituals makes a really, really big difference. And I've got another friend, he's Richard, he's the Chief Purpose Officer of KPMG. We catch up most Thursday mornings for a walk in the bush. I'm on the bush here in Sydney. And yeah, it doesn't have to be a lot of people. And the evidence is really strong about this. The Harvard Adult Development Study followed 600 odd men for their entire lives. And there was one overwhelming study. Those that had the best life, the longest life, the best sex life, the most affluent life were those that had caring and supportive relationships around us. And I truly believe now that the quality of our relationships determines the quality of our life.
I agree. And if somebody who's listening specifically from a leadership or business point of view, I also agree with that in the business sphere. The quality of your relationships professionally determines the quality of your profession and the way that you show up and your results.
Yeah. And Gallup have found that as well. One of their questions in the Q12, which predicts engagement and discretionary effort, is I have a best friend at work. And that wording has been tested. I have a good friend or I have a best friend. Overwhelmingly, the engagement is much higher if they say I've got a best friend at work.
I bet you could find the same in school kids as well. When they feel like they've got a best mate at school, I bet you that their learning and their memory and everything improves.
Absolutely. The other part about team leadership is psychological safety, which is making it comfortable for people to be their authentic selves, feel like they're included, feel like they can make suggestions, and also challenge ideas that don't agree with it. When you think about your life and also the amazing people that you've coached and you've known, what do they do to create that sort of environment?
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that psychological safety, there's probably two environments that I think of. One is the professional sporting environment that I work in, and the other is very different, but it's down in Antarctica. So I work down in Antarctica at Scott Base. So it's New Zealand's base. And two very different environments. However, when there's successful outcomes there, I look at, well, what happened? The leaders created psychological safety. And so there's a couple of things. If I look at both those leaders that I've worked with in those environments, both the leaders were learn-it-alls. They were not know-it-alls. And so they were very curious. They would ask questions. They would allow others to come to the table with wisdom and take credit, as opposed to always having to run the show. Also, there's this little simple, it's called the trick principle. And I often bring this into teams that I'm working with. And it was an amazing lady out of Palo Alto Primary School called Esther Wajiki. And she used this to raise her own kids and raise the school kids. So trick, trust. You've got to build trust. If there's psychological safety that's going to be had, trust has got to be at the baseline. How do we build trust? We show up. We follow through what we say we're going to do. We can support others when they need it. R is respect. Self-respect and respect for others, their beliefs, their wishes, their skill sets. The I is independence. So once there's enough trust and respect, people can independently do their work and perform and not be micromanaged. The C is collaboration. So not needing to have all the answers and drive everything. And when people are trusted and respected and they have independence, then they can collaborate really well. And the K is the most important part. It's I was chatting with Richie McCaw. A lot of Australians that are listening will not really like Richie McCaw. He was the former captain of the All Blacks.
Yeah, longest serving, I think.
Yeah, so he's probably the longest serving captain. He's 140 something caps, and my friend Sam Whitelock, he got 153 caps, so he just beat him in terms of caps. But I said to Richie, what's the most important value that you're trying to instill in your kids? So him and I have children similar age. And he says, oh, yeah, me and the wife were chatting about this. There's only one value. And I was thinking to myself, he's Richie McCaw. He's fierce. He's a world champion. It'll be like determination, drive, success. The K in trick is exactly what he said is kindness. Kindness is the one value that we want our kids to leave the house with.
Amazing.
That's a simple little principle, that little trick principle. But I've seen it work well in, hostile environments like the Antarctic program. I've seen it work well in sports teams where big, burly, gruff folks. I've seen it work really well in the boardroom. Super simple, but for psychological safety, to me, those things have got to be present.
Absolutely. And I'm sure a lot of Australians would find it hard to believe that Richie McCaw's driving habit was kindness on the field.
Yeah, true.
Ferocity. Super competitive, that's for sure. And an amazing player. And for those people that aren't in Australia or New Zealand, you should know that rugby is like a religion in New Zealand. It's the most dominant sport and the most elite team. Teams won the highest win rate of any team in the world, I think, which is extraordinary. And
across all sports.
No, yeah, it's really, really incredible. So, what else did you learn from Richie McCaw or your other colleagues or friends who worked in rugby about what contributed to that amazing culture that delivered extraordinary results?
CIA. So this is one thing I've heard from the head coaches that led those teams. This is one thing I've heard from the players, the friends that have played deep in those fields. So CIA. So first thing is clarity. That's radical clarity. They're really clear on what the job looked like, what the outcome was supposed to look like, what their responsibilities were. Second was I in CIA, intensity. Right? When the time comes, you've got to have intense focus, intense delivery. And that means being present, like
Mm,
being super present, not being distracted. Your intensity level's got to be there. And you've also got to learn how to pull your intensity level back. So
mm,
sometimes they've got to be what they call in the red, which is more intense, or back in the blue, which is more calm. So when the referee's calling something out that you don't like, you get out of the red real quick into the blue and you talk calmly. Same at work. Sometimes we do need to be intense and it does matter and it's a critical emergency. And other times, actually, we're being challenged or maybe our ego's being attacked. Let's just take our intensity level down.
mm,
And CIA, the A is accuracy, right? Whatever you're going to do, be accurate, speak clearly, deliver clearly, pass the ball well, whatever your field is or industry is, have clarity of what it looks like, know when to be intense or when not, and have accuracy in everything that you deliver. That was one of the big things I took away from almost every conversation with people that played in that specific world champion team.
yeah, amazing. I also interviewed Alex Liu on the podcast. He was the global managing partner for Carney, a management consulting firm. And he had risen from incredible humble beginnings. Like his father was born into a peasant family that was literally on a rice paddy and in Taiwan. And then his father was the first one educated, and he got to go to the US and became a professor in the US. So Alex came from really humble beginnings, but he was global partner of Carney for 8 years. And he had a real quest to, improve the culture in organizations. And he wrote a book called Joy Works, which is about, work shouldn't be hard. It should be challenging, but we should have good fun along the way, which I really love. But when I asked him about what he'd learned about winning work, winning big assignments, building great teams, he said it comes down to basically three things. And he said it comes down to competence. The client's got to feel that you know what you're doing. It's got to be just, you've got to be able to demonstrate that sort of credibility very, very quickly. Confidence, which is, you'll get it. There could be roadblocks, there could be setbacks, but you'll work out how to do. And then he said, which I was delighted to hear, he said, and then there's a third, and I reckon this determines the most decisions of clients. And the third one was care, that the client feels that you care about them, care about their team, care about the organization. And, we talk about business and sport and those fundamental qualities come through. And I think that is really the foundation of amazing teams.
You're absolutely right. I was chatting a long time ago. I was working with Barack Obama's most senior advisor. And I said, look, when you think about what he's trying to achieve here as president, how do you do that? How do you get a whole nation behind that? And he said, James, it comes down to Barack talked about these three questions. And these three questions are being asked by anybody in the country. If you're running the country or if you're in a company, anyone that's reporting to you are asking these three questions subconsciously. And let's take it to another level. If you're in a family or in some kind of relationship, the people that are in the relationship with you are also asking these three same questions. So those questions are, number one, do you care about me? It's the very first one. Secondly, do you value me? And last but not least, are you here to help me succeed? Like, will I grow? Will I get better? And Barack Obama said, if you can answer those three through your actions and how you treat others, you will get discretionary effort. You will get buy-in. You will get loyalty. You will get great performance. I would say he's not wrong. Whether you love him or loathe him as a leader, that's besides the point. I think what he says is just so valuable.
And I think we have to agree that great leaders care.
Yeah. 100%. Underline that 10 times.
With regards to the red zone, where people are off their best game, they've had setbacks and even slipping down the moodometer, so they're anxious or depressed or whatever. What have you found is the best way to address that with a business person, a sports person, to get them back on track?
Yeah. So look, your perception shapes your reality. And so however you're looking at the situation and whatever meaning you are attaching to it determines how you feel. So we need to remember we are in control of our perception. We can manipulate it, change it through our belief systems. So the first thing for someone who's depressed, anxious, feeling off, angry in the red zone is awareness. Like you've got to become aware. And often to become aware, we need to detach. So there's a really great acronym. My mentor taught me this years ago. It's called DAPPER. So detach. So that might be take a breath. That could allow you to detach. It could be leave the room. It could be go for a run, whatever, just detach. Next thing is assess. So that's your heightening your awareness. What's actually going on? What are the facts? Not my assumptions, but what are the facts? Okay, now I've got everything in place and I've asked some questions of myself and others. Next thing is, what's the priority? What are all the priorities here for me to move forward? Well, I want to go from red to blue. I want to go from anxious to feeling even just neutral would be quite nice. Okay, what's the plan? That's the second P. What's the plan to get there? Then the E, simple, execute. Let's do something to move there. And R is review. So detach, assess, prioritize, plan, execute it, and review. So if someone's sitting there going, James, I actually feel like crap, what do I do? Well, acknowledge that you're feeling that way. Don't try and push it down. Don't try and say that it's wrong. These feelings are trying to tell us something. So embrace it, make space for the feeling to sit there, and then ask yourself, what's the next best feeling I could move towards? So let's say you're depressed on one end of the spectrum and elated is on the other end of the spectrum. To go from depressed to elated is delusional, I think. But if you want to say, I want to go from depressed to sad, awesome. We're moving up the scale a little bit. What's one thing I could do to move from this depression to sadness? Well, you know what? I've been sitting down with my head slumped forward for the last 20 minutes. I'm just going to go up and go for a 5-minute walk. That might take you from feeling depressed to going, I'm still not great, but I'm not as bad as I was 5 minutes ago. So it's about taking ownership and shifting that perception.
Yeah. I love that. It's a way of thinking about what to do when you're in that situation. And often it takes a coach or a mentor to help make that happen. And I was involved in starting Are You OK? And that was what we sought to do there is to have people feel heard, but also to really encourage to take one step to help them, whether it's going to a doctor or calling Laughlin or whatever. Because, I spent a long time in the red zone and it's bloody hard to get out of there. It's much, much easier to stay in the green zone than it is to get out of the red zone. And, I think ultimately I gave a keynote yesterday for a group called the Women's Resilience Centre, women that are experiencing domestic and family violence. And they have a theme that recovery is prevention. And I really like that because on the way, they learn things that can help them boost their mood, boost their independence financially and job-wise, etc. But then those same habits then prevent things happening in the future. And that was my experience as well, in terms of coming from severe depression and then adopting the VIP, the vitality, intimacy, prosperity. But, just make it realistic, make it a little bit outside your comfort zone, but you won't change everything overnight. Just go a little bit outside your comfort zone. And that's where growth and progress happens.
You're spot on. I mean, I've only ever grown when I've been uncomfortable. And it could be the simplest things. For example, I couldn't swim. Something happened to me as a kid. I hated the water. 31 years of age at the time. My little boy is about 9 months old. And I thought, what if something happens to him? I can't do a thing. So I need to get swim lessons. Now, I'm a 31-year-old and I'm quite, self-conscious about going into a swimming pool and getting lessons. And so I get a swimming pool as far away from the city as I could find it. It was out in the countryside. It was a private like swimming school. And I rock up for my first lesson. I am so anxious. I'm a nervous wreck, but I know I've got to get into my discomfort zone to actually grow. So I walk in, I'm like, nobody's going to know me out here. I walk in and there's about 30 mums with buggies, all watching their 4-year-olds getting swim lessons. And there's me going in, get my lesson. I was so mortified. It was horrible, Graham. But 5 weeks passed and I floated and then I treaded water and then I started swimming. I was like, this was worth all that cringy stuff that I was going through. So I think for someone right now that's listening, pick the thing that scares you, that you're fearful of, whether it's public speaking, whether it's, for me, it was swimming. Pick something in your personal life and just go and give it a crack. Give it a couple of months of effort. And if you can overcome that, you start to take that courage and apply it to your other parts of your career and life.
Yeah, fantastic. Our time's really flown, James. I can't believe as we found on your podcast, there's a lot we've got in common in terms of beliefs and research and insights. And I guess that's not surprising.
Yeah, I love your work.
Vice versa. So one question I always finish with is, what would you tell your 20-year-old self, knowing what you know now and the pain, the elation, everything you've been through? What advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Yeah. Okay. Be more patient. I was in a hurry to win things, to be the world champion, to try and get rich, to read books at lightning speed. So be patient, be kind, and I look back at 20-year-old James and he wasn't that kind to himself and at times wasn't kind to others. And believe in yourself. Believe that it is possible. Believe that the things that you think are outside of your reach, that, hey, it's actually possible to achieve that. And for me, I've seen people again and again reach the most incredible heights on field and off field by really believing in themselves and writing down, I believe I can, I believe I will. Get out of your head onto the page, start rewiring your beliefs. So yeah, I'd give him a hug, tell him, slow down, be kind, be patient, and believe in yourself.
Yeah, I love that. Be kind, believe in yourself. That's a great way to approach life. Thanks for being part of the Caring CEO, James. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.